G'day YouTube, Warbles on the lot here. Guess who started a video and it didn't work out well, so let's just take up from here and we'll see how we go. Stardate, Australia, 7 December, the anniversary of the pearling of the harbour. 83 years ago. What can I say? With all of the stuff in the world going on, one of the things I would like to share is that I have arrived at a data point, a significant piece of information and a correlation which is kind of valid right now, right here in Australia, and depending on your own local tax regime and the value of your own currency, it's probably able to be adjusted, modified, fine-tuned, so that you can start with my particular formula and apply it to your own situation and come up with some kind of a meaningful piece of information. Here's how it goes. What we're riding on at the moment, doing 50 kilometres an hour at maximum continuous throttle, using 3 kilowatts of motor output. When I go home after this ride, I'll charge it up with standalone solar power on a designated, specific, standalone solar system which pretty much does nothing but recharge this motorbike. So I'm in a position to say with some considerable authority that if you've got 3 kilowatts of rated motor output on your electric vehicle, then to charge the battery to feed that motor, you're going to need to spend 10,049 Australian dollars to get enough batteries, solar panels, charge controller, inverter, installation, and pay the GST on it. So therefore we can divide it by 3 to come down to what it costs per kilowatt of rated motor capacity in your electric vehicle. $3,330. So if you've got a 100 kilowatt motor in your electric vehicle, you only need $250,000 to buy the solar panels, the batteries, the charge controller and the inverter to be able to go out and about all day in your electric 100 kilowatt vehicle. And 100 kilowatts, it's really only 125 horsepower, you know, like they make motorbikes bigger than that. So the Tesla will cost about $92,000 in Australia, and I do know a bloke who drives his Tesla to town from 50 kilometres away down at the bottom of a mountain. And after his day's working in town, he goes home and he charges his Tesla on his stored electricity which has been collected during the day by his standalone solar system. And he told me, in all honesty, when I asked him how much did you have to spend to upgrade your solar system to deal with the Tesla, and he said $48,000, and I didn't question it. And sorry to say, I've repeated that figure numerous times to many people. I've mentioned it on some YouTube videos. So he must have had $100,000 worth of solar gear on the roof of his garage already. It's all I can think of to explain the anomaly. And he was just being modest. And maybe his Tesla's only got a 50 kilowatt motor and he only had to spend 165,000. I don't know, but I've got an electric vehicle with a 3 kilowatt hour motor, and it cost me $10,000 to be able to recharge it on stored sunlight. I'm absolutely delighted with it, but that is the situation. Meanwhile, if you see an electric vehicle that is being charged by a coal-fired, gas-fired power grid, then it's got about the same emissions footprint as a diesel-powered four-wheel drive the same weight. So it's very difficult to see how electrifying the road transport network is going to be much of a help to the average individual. Unless you've got some intergenerational wealth transfer going on, you're going to be struggling to be able to afford even a poor man's Tesla like what I'm sitting on. And meanwhile, we ride on into the Trumpocalypse. I'm assuming that the sort of people who watch my videos have been paying at least a little bit of attention to international politics, world affairs, and the situation report of planet Earth. To look at the high points since last I made a Trumpocalypse Rideabout video. On the one hand, a Chinese boat with a Russian captain dragged its anchor and cut 2 undersea communication cables between, I think, Lithuania and Denmark, and Lithuania and Finland. The French Prime Minister has lost a vote of no confidence in the French government, basically in lame duck mode until they can have another snap election. The South Korean Prime Minister, President, whatever he is, attempted to declare martial law apropos of nothing at all, and that lasted for 6 hours. Meanwhile, in the excited status of Norte Americano, it becomes increasingly clear that more or less everything upon which I speculated in the previous video regarding Trumpy being operated by Musk and Putin on behalf of the accelerationists appears to be not wrong. It really, truly does. Every pick that Trump has made to his presidential cabinet has been a 3-time loser, noted for their corruption, incompetence, criminality, misogyny, child abuse, sexual abuse. History of propagandising for foreign adversary powers. It could not be any clearer that Trumpy is doing everything he can to dismantle the United States population's faith in their own government, willingness to be governed, willingness to consent to be governed. The people who voted for cheap eggs had no idea that they were voting to get rid of the Department of Education. Get rid of all funding for government schools, federal government schools. Federal funding for schools, because their local schools are supposed to be funded by the local ratepayers, which is why people who grow up in poor parts of the country tend to get really horrible educations. It's the exact opposite of the way the Australian Education Department used to work. Once they made it a legal requirement to send your kids to school, the government had to provide schools. And before motorised transport, that meant there were a lot of little tiny one-teacher schools in the middle of farming country. This place here, Ranges Valley Station, pretty sure they would have had their own school. There's another valley out to the southwest of town, Talkabout, one-teacher school. I think during the 1920s, they had about 4 Rhodes Scholars came out of the Talkabout comprehensive one-teacher school. If I was the sort of nerd who studies that sort of things, I could no doubt rattle them off the top of my head, but I'm not that sort of a nerd. So, what the USA is going to be like when there is no federal funding to top up impoverished local public schools, it really sounds like they're aiming at Tsarist Russian conditions where only the rich teach their children how to read and everybody else is a dutifully obedient, absolutely ignorant serf. Because we still don't have the correct mechanical conditioning of the right-hand front shock strut, I'm not going to go out there on the dirt road. Instead of that, we will turn them around here. And of course, meanwhile, the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu and the head of Hamas, although the head of Hamas has apparently already been killed by the Israeli Defense Forces. And all the allegedly do-gooding, hand-wringing, civilised democracies of the world are now scratching their heads and deciding who's going to arrest Benjamin Netanyahu if he's dumb enough to show up at their place. But of course, Benjamin Netanyahu has no fear because God's on his side, because he's an Israeli, and Israelis are Jewish, and they're running a Zionist government, heavily influenced by extreme right-wing Orthodox Jews. They don't have to worry about any kind of an afterlife because that's not part of the Jewish religion. Their God theory expresses approval by their material prosperity, power and wealth in the here and now. It was one of the revelations claimed by the Christians that Jesus told everybody that you've actually got an immortal soul, and depending on how you conduct yourself while you're alive, that determines where you go afterwards. By no means the only spiritual pontificator to make such a statement over the years, but the Christians do like to pretend that they have a patent on that one. So then you got the people who don't believe that God's on their side, because they don't believe, well, they can't imagine any sort of a God theory capable of balancing all the equations and making all the observations, so therefore they don't believe there is a God theory. They consider that anybody who believes in the God theory is brain damaged. It's a popular view. It appeals to about 1 person in 12, call it 8% of humanity. About the same proportion as short-sightedness, left-handedness, colour-blindedness, same-sex attractiveness. It is apparently a pro-survival function for the tribe to retain and conserve the DNA for making atheists. Because if absolutely everybody is easy to convince about the merits of dubious ideological arguments, then the entire population of the world would fall under the sway of demagogues and half-wits all at the same time. But as long as you've got some people who just don't believe in any kind of a cosmic scoreboard effect, anyone who tries to run a bullshit, nepotistic, corruption-based, quote, theocracy on Earth tends to run a very short course. It doesn't work very well for very long. But there's time limits on everything. Somebody once said 250 years is the time span of an empire. I don't know how they account for the Roman Empire, because it seems to have gone on longer than that in my recollection. But the Americans at the moment are looking at 248 years, and I don't know that they're going to see 3 years. Not the way they're going. At the moment, the incoming Trump administration still has not signed the transition agreement documents. And I don't know whether it's actually lawful to inaugurate Trumpy when he and his administration haven't signed the transition agreements, which would mean he has not agreed to obey any of the American laws or constitution or traditions. When you consider that, along with the way he appears to be deliberately setting the government up to fight within itself and then fail as he defunds it, all of which appear to be running absolutely 100% straight down the centre line of the accelerationist agenda to crash the global trading economy in order to protect what's left of the environment. To the people who've spent their entire life and career attempting to keep society as honest and as fair as possible, the accelerationist agenda looks very, very much like a return to the 1880s robber baron era, where there are no constraints on laissez-faire capitalism and the peasantry just gets to be kicked to the wayside and starve and die and have no safety nets at all. I can visualise fairly strong numbers of people in the Pentagon, the serving military community and the veteran community, and the long-term professional civil service who would have a problem with the incoming administration and their agenda. I can visualise them covertly organising to make sure that something else happens other than inaugurating Trumpy. I just don't see it happening. Which means that either the accelerationists or the Russians have given America a dilemma. A dilemma is when they have a problem which doesn't have a solution, that has several solutions, and each solution makes all the other issues worse. If the people who revere constitutional government decide, okay, Trump was elected, even though he lost the popular vote by almost 1%, he won the College of Electors, therefore he's the next president. He gets to do whatever he wants to do. He told the population that they were going to have to suffer economic hardship because, as Elon Musk said, we need to break the economy in order to reshape the economy. They want to apply 20% tariff on everything imported, and America manufactures and produces almost nothing. So therefore, supply and demand means prices on everything's going to go up. And the theory is this is going to cause all the jobs that got exported out of America in the last 40 years, they're all going to come flocking back to America, and everybody's going to buy made in America stuff. And they'll be able to do that when American wages and working conditions and pensions and healthcare are approximately equal with the workers in Bangladesh and Vietnam and the Philippines. Maybe China, although China's probably going to have much better working conditions than America, as long as their ecology and environment lasts. And that's the kicker, the environment's not lasting. There's a bit of new data out of Antarctica suggesting that as long as the ice sheet holds, the ice cap may not be going to let go quite as soon as we had feared, like sometime in 100 to 150 years instead of sometime in the next 1 to 5 years. So the problem is the ice sheet is still absolutely dependent on the integrity of the ice sheet around Greenland, and it's coming to pieces fairly rapidly. But I find it an inescapable conclusion that the Trump administration is intent on dismantling everything, every factor of American society on which the citizens used to be able to count on, or used to be able to count for assistance in an emergency. You know, you get an actual foreign invasion, they've got an army and a navy and an air force to deal with it, but you know, they've got such a big army, navy and air force, nobody's been willing to invade them. But the people who came out of the collapse that followed the Soviet Union, they expected to be allowed to join the Europeans and join NATO as an economic trading community, and they got shut out, they got the shits. And basically, the KGB took over the Kremlin, but they took over the Kremlin a long time after the CIA took over the White House. Because George Herbert Walker Bush was the deputy director of the CIA before he became vice president, and then he became president. And he stacked the Supreme Court, so they declared that there was no need to count the votes when Al Gore actually won the election, and George W. Bush was installed as his father's business coalition's puppet. Halliburton was pulling the strings to make George W. do what he did. So now we behold a situation where Putin's oligarchs funneling money into Trump have just put the cherry on top of the deconstruction of the American citizenry's ability to think critically, to examine data, to process information, to pay attention to anything that matters. I have no idea what anybody could do about it. It's all been the result of individual, personal free will and freedom of choice. And they don't listen to people who disagree with them. They don't consider dissenting opinions. I got a couple of friends who were totally convinced that Trump was going to win because they really enjoy his attitude to woke bashing, basically. And it seems that no matter what I say these days, their response, their riposte, their put down to me goes along the lines of, oh yeah, absolutely sure. Trump's going to jail, he's never going to be the president again. That's right, isn't it, Chris? So, who are, I admit it, I thought better of Americans than they proved themselves to be. What I was not aware until after the election is that the illiteracy rate among the US population is 21%, absolute, totally bloody illiterate. They can't read at all whatsoever. They don't write anything. They use emoticons on their phones. And another 54% cannot pass a reading comprehension test beyond the level of grade 6, the end of primary school. And Trump said he loves the uneducated. That's why he knew he could stand up there and tell them, oh, I'm going to put a 20% tariff on everything and make the foreign governments pay the taxes, and that'll stop fentanyl and immigrants from crossing the border, and you'll have cheap eggs in the supermarket. Oh, yes, Trumpy, no Trumpy, 3 bags full Trumpy. They're too stupid to know how stupid they are. There's 75% of 350 million walking, talking, ambulatory Dunning-Kruger effect subjects. And I'm getting people trying to tell me that I'm an arsehole for talking about it. Probably the same people who reckon I'm an arsehole for saying that the environment would have been better off if we'd had a nuclear war in 1984. Because back when there was only 4 billion people on the planet, if 3/4 of humanity had been killed, there would have only been 3 billion people suffering and dying a horrible, nasty death. But no, we've now bred up to 8 billion. So if the accelerationists get their own way and they wipe out 7/8 of humanity, 7 billion people are going to get to have the hairy end of the pineapple shoved up their arse at the terminal end of their life. I'm really pissed off that humanity did not choose to pay attention to the science for the last 60 fucking years, you know? Exercise a bit of self-restraint instead of competing in the rat race to see who can make the most profit the fastest by trashing planet Earth. And what can I say? My idea of a God theory is omnipotent, omniscient, omnipresent, competent and benevolent, and with a bit of a viciously sardonic sense of humour. If you want to climb out onto the end of a branch of a tree and then use a handsaw to sit on the far end of the branch and cut it off between where you're sitting and the trunk, that can be your choice. It's one of your options. You can do that if you want to. Humanity used to live in a food forest, and one of the options was to destroy it in order to get, quote, rich, unquote. Probably the very best analogy is the intergenerational starship, where once upon a time a lot of extreme expertise went into building a biosphere, a self-sustaining, self-repairing biosphere. To that end, the engine room was stationed 93 million miles away from the crew compartment, so nobody could fiddle with the engine controls in the continuous hydrogen fusion reaction. However, 12,500 years ago, one sect, one tribe, one clan, one family among the crew went stark raving fucking mad, and they decided a really good idea would be to chop up the air recyclers and dig up the water and food recyclers and use the chopped up air recyclers to light fires and smelt the water and food recyclers and make shiny, shiny jewellery and sell the jewellery to each other and make themselves rich. And they did that in their fucking spaceship, and they broke the fucking air recycling machine. They broke the water recycling machine. And that's why you can't drink the groundwater. In most of the northern hemisphere you can't see more than 5 miles either because of all the shit they poked into the air. Burning the forests, digging up the ground, smelting the coal, burning the oil, melting the ores, over-harvesting every living fucking thing in the biosphere. Also it could be transported to market and sold to a bunch of smug, fat, complacent, soft, rich, fat wealth holders whose ancestors had grown rich, creating the food desert in the overpopulated shithole in which they lived. So welcome to the Trumpocalypse. Not my choice, but you know, like, what can a fool on the hill do? I remember when there was 319 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and now there's 426. Literally living on a different planet. And I was trying to figure out how many of the 3 billion people that were alive when I was born are alive now that there's 8 billion other people on the planet. And what sort of a minority would me and people my age be compared to the Australian population? Like, what percent of Australians are over 63 and were born in Australia? And if you really wanted to restrict it, you could say, you know, and how many of them have grandparents born in Australia? And I might be part of a smaller minority than the Aborigines and the Torres Strait Islanders. I don't know, but something like that. Alright, somebody's got a fire going. Somewhere between New England Highway and Maguire Highway by the look of that. Had 30 millimetres of rain last week. Hopefully that's a permitted burn. The country should be fairly wet. It's a Saturday. They should have crews to play with it. very far away, but in an easterly breeze. It's got a lot of forest between where it is and the highway, and if it gets across the highway, I'm going to have a difficulty on my hands because there's nothing to stop it except the power lines, easement. .48 watt hours per kilometre, doing 44 kilometres an hour up the hill on 57% of the battery, and we've done 36k since I set out. There's a bit less than that on this video. But anyway, I reckon this is probably a good time to start prioritising one's vegetable garden and water supplies, because I have no bloody idea how long there's going to be food in the supermarkets. And the idiots who run the banking system in Australia are trying very hard to get rid of cash money. The Commonwealth Bank was going to start charging $3 for a cash withdrawal made in person, you know, over the counter. The backlash was so deep and so hard that that idea lasted 24 hours. Meanwhile, over in the land of the Second Amendment, where healthcare is not a right, unless you've got a job and your employer decides to buy you some, over there was a health insurance company which had a reputation for denying 90% of claims submitted by its policy holders. And somebody shot the bloke who run that company in the back on the street as he was walking to work, fired 3 shots, manually ejected 3 cartridges unfired, with deny, delay, depose written individually on the 3 unfired cartridges. And while the mainstream media are claiming that nobody knows who did it or why, or what for, or how come, and why would you want to do that? All the social media is lighting up with people saying somebody should go and shoot another 50 of those bastards. Everybody in America hates their health insurance companies. But it's insurance. And insurance is a scam. 51 kilometres an hour. The whole idea of insurance is that people pay money to be financially insured against the consequences of whatever they're afraid might perhaps possibly happen. Somebody else forms an underwriters pool and they employ actuaries to figure out what the likelihood of that occurrence is, and they take the money. And for example, that house over there, the likelihood of it losing its roof in a thunderstorm right there is 1 in 300 years. If they try to insure the roof of that house against storm and tempest, the annual premium will be 1/50th of the cost of rebuilding the roof. So every time the insurance company gives them a new roof, they give the insurance company 6 roofs. And the insurance company keeps 5 roofs as profit. Life insurance runs on the idea that the Creator God theory of the universe does not know when each individual is ready to die, when they've reached their spiritual peak, when there are no further options open to them for them to make a decision that will lead them toward the light rather than toward the darkness. The insurance company trades on individuals who live in fear of random bad shit happening to good people who don't deserve bad shit. Oh, they have little faith. Insurance is economic God theory for behavioural atheists. They have to be atheists, otherwise they wouldn't be so frightened of their God theory fucking shit up. They would have a little faith, but they do not. Not that you can see, not going by the way they behave. So it's going to be fairly exciting to see what happens. Will the pentagonal hemorrhoids of the Joint Chiefs of Staff stand by and watch Hegseth appointed as the Secretary of State for Defence, an adulterous drunk, an incompetent administrator who sent 2 Veterans Affairs organisations which were funded by the Koch brothers, he sent them broke purely by his incompetence. You reckon the pentagonal hemorrhoids are going to sit still while Trump appoints a dickhead like that over the top of them? I'm going to be very surprised. I think between the 14th Amendment and the 25th Amendment and the oath to defend against all enemies, foreign and domestic, I think something else is going to happen. And whereas America's guaranteed to come unglued if Trump's in government, I think it's probably also guaranteed to go down a pretty deep fucking gurgly hole if they have a coup and establish a military junta in charge, quote, until new elections can be called. Maybe they'll come back from there, maybe not. Either which way, America's not going to be in much of a fit state or condition to be supporting anybody in Europe or Asia or continue to fund the Ukrainian war. It's a case where we live in interesting times, and the Times, spelt T-H-Y-M-E-S, they're all A''changeling. The Times, they be a changeling. And that, I'm afraid, is the size of it. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. There you go. You got a ride on a bitumen road, and you got me warbling on. Ciao.